Hello everyone, I am Dr. Siad, MBBS, MD in Health Informatics. In this tutorial series, we are going to discuss the nursing care of adults with medical and surgical issues with the latest next generation NCLEX-RN type questions. Today we are doing a full deep dive on pulmonary embolism or PE, which is one of those high priority topics that shows up on the NCLEX again and again because it's a true nursing emergency that requires fast recognition and action. This lecture is based on chapter 30 of Lewis Medical Surgical Nursing. So let's start with the basics. What exactly a pulmonary embolism? A pulmonary embolism is the blockage of one or more pulmonary arteries, the blood vessels that carry blood from the heart to the lungs. That blockage can be caused by a thrombus, that is a blood clot, or less commonly by fat, air, or tumor tissue. The pathophysiology, here is how it happens step by step. A piece of material, usually a clot that broke off from a deep vein, enters the venous system. It travels through the right side of the heart and out into the pulmonary circulation. As the blood vessel gets smaller and smaller, the clot eventually gets lodged. And when it lodges, it blocks the perfusion to the alveoli in that area, meaning the lungs can't properly oxygenate the blood. The lower lobes are affected most often. You will also want to know the term venous thromboembolism or VTE. This is the umbrella term that covers the whole spectrum from DVT, that is deep vein thrombosis, all the way through the full pulmonary embolism. You will see VTE used frequently in your textbook and in the NCLEX. Let's see the sources of emboli. Where do these clots come from? The most common sources by far deep veins of the legs, that is deep vein thrombosis. But they can also come from a femoral or iliac veins. Also from the right side of the heart, especially in patients with atrial fibrillation, pelvic veins after surgery or childbirth, and upper extremity veins in patients with central venal catheters. Less common causes include fat emboli from fractured long bones, air emboli from improperly administered IV therapy, and bacterial vaginations on heart valves, amniotic fluid emboli, and emboli from cancer. Alright, risk factors. And I have got a mnemonic for you that makes this really easy to remember. It's called CLOTS. Fitting, right? C stands for cancer, clotting disorders, and oral contraceptives. Cancer, particularly certain malignancies, creates hypercoagulable state. Inherited clotting disorders do the same. And oral contraceptives, especially estrogen containing pills, especially increase the clot risk. This is a really common NCLEX question. So patient on the pill and persons with the PE signs know it. L is for long travel and leg or pelvic surgery. Prolonged air travel causes venous stasis. The blood just sits there and can clot. Surgery, especially pelvic and lower extremity surgery, is a major risk factor. If surgery happened within the last 3 months, that's significant. O is for obesity and immobility. Being on bed rest, both of these independently increase the risk. Obesity adds pressure on pelvic veins. Immobility allows blood to pool and stagnate. T for trauma and prior thrombosis history. If a patient has had a DVT or PE before, they are at significantly higher risk for another one. This is one of the biggest risk factors in the assessment. And S covers smoking, surgery, stillness in pregnancy, and heart failure. Pregnancy is a high risk state, increased clotting factors, pressure on veins, and reduced mobility. Heart failure causes venous stasis as well. Hormone replacement therapy also falls in this category. On the NCLEX, a question about a post-op patient who is immobile, obese, or on oral contraceptives should immediately make you think DVT and PE risk. Prevention is nursing priority. Now we get to clinical manifestations, and this is where I need you to pay very close attention because the NCLEX loves to test you on these signs and symptoms. Here's the key thing you understand right from the start. The signs and symptoms of PE are non-specific and varied. There's no one single presentation. Small emboli may go completely undetected. Symptoms can come on slowly or appear suddenly and dramatically. This is exactly what makes PE so dangerous and so tricky to diagnose. Your number one fact to memorize, dyspnea is the most common presenting symptom. If you remember nothing else from this slide, remember that dyspnea equals PE until proven otherwise. For a moderate PE, you might also see tachypnea and tachycardia. pleuritic chest pain, that sharp pain that gets worse with breathing, cough and hemoptysis, which is coughing up blood. You may hear crackles and wheezing on auscultation. The patient might have low-grade fever, an accentuated pulmonary heart sound, mild to moderate hypoxia, and probably syncope, that is fainting. Now, massive PE is a completely different beast. This is a true emergency. You will see a sudden change in mental status. This is huge. Severe hypotension. The patient may describe a feeling of impending doom. They sense something is terribly wrong, and in the worst case, you are looking at cardiorespiratory arrest. Critical alert. Around 10% of patients with massive PE die within the first hour. This is why early recognition and immediate intervention are critical. If your patient suddenly becomes agitated or confused, hypotensive, and tells you they feel like they are going to die, think massive PE, call for help immediately, and be ready to act. Let's talk about how PE is diagnosed. There are several tests used, and the NCLEX will test your ability to distinguish between them, especially which one are definitive and which are just supportive. The gold standard for diagnosing PE is the spiral CT scan, also called helical CT or CT angiography or CTA. This test requires an IV injection of contrast dye, and the scanner rotates continuously around the patient, creating a three-dimensional image of the pulmonary vasculature. It can see all the anatomic regions in the lungs. When someone comes in suspected of having a PE, this is the first-line imaging test. If the patient can't receive contrast dye, say they have contrast allergy or renal failure, the alternative is VQ scan. That stands for ventilation perfusion scan. It has two parts. Perfusion scanning, which uses an IV radioisotope to image blood flow through the lungs, and ventilation scanning, which has the patient inhale a radioactive gas to show how air distributes through the lungs. The test is most accurate when both parts are done together. Know this, it's best for non-ventilated cooperative patients. Next is arterial blood gas analysis. It's an important but is not diagnostic for PE. The PaO2 may be low because occluded pulmonary vessels prevent proper oxygenation. The pH is often normal but may shift into respiratory alkalosis if the patient hyperventilates or toward acidosis in shock. ABG helps you assess the severity of the situation, but it won't confirm the PE. D-dimer is a blood test that measures cross-linked fibrin fragments, the byproducts of the clot degeneration. Now here's the NCLEX trap. D-dimer is sensitive but not specific. What does that mean? It means many things can cause an elevated dimer, like infection, trauma, surgery, pregnancy, not just PE. And critically, up to 50% of patients with a small PE will have a normal D-dimer result. A negative D-dimer helps rule PE out, but a positive one doesn't confirm it. Chest X-ray may show atelectasis or pleural effusion, but again not diagnostic. An ECG shows non-specific ST and T wave changes, and troponin and BNP are often elevated, indicating right heart strain. They are useful clinically but supportive, not confirmatory. So the NCLEX tip: D-dimer negative helps you to rule out PE, positive is not diagnostic. Chest X-ray and ECG supportive finding only, neither confirm PE. Let's look at the drug therapy. Drug therapy for PE is organized into three phases, and you need to know all three for NCLEX. The goal of anticoagulation is not to dissolve the existing clot. It is to prevent the clot from growing and to prevent new clots from forming, while the body dissolves the existing one naturally. Phase 1, initial first 7 days. In the first 7 days, the drug of choice is subcutaneous low molecular weight heparin, LMWH. The brand names you need to know are enoxaparin, also known as Levonox, Fragmin, and Fondaparinux. Why low molecular weight heparin over regular heparin? Because it's safer, more predictable, and more effective. And here's a critical NCLEX point. You do not need to monitor APTT with LMWH. That only applies to unfractionated heparin. Unfractionated IV heparin is still effective, but it's harder to titrate to therapeutic levels. Phase 2, longer, up to 6 weeks. starting at the time of diagnosis, not when you finish the heparin, but right from the start. You also begin warfarin, brand name Coumadin. This is an oral anticoagulant that takes a few days to reach therapeutic effect, which is why it overlaps with the heparin initially. Alternatives to warfarin include the newer oral anticoagulants like apixaban, brand name Eliquis, and dabigatran, brand name Pradaxa, and edoxaban, brand name Savisa. Direct thrombin inhibitors also sometimes used. Phase 3 extended 6 months and beyond. Warfarin continues for a minimum of 3 to 6 months and then is re-evaluated. If the patient has had large or recent emboli, they may be placed on anticoagulants indefinitely. In life-threatening situations, fibrinolytics like TPA or alteplase may be used. These agents actually work to dissolve the clot. If shock is present, vasopressors are added. If heart failure is present, diuretics are added. The contraindication to know: liver disease that affects clotting, active or overt bleeding, history of hemorrhagic shock, heparin-induced thrombocytopenia in short-term HIT, and other blood dyscrasis. In these patients, alternative approaches like IV filter may be necessary, which we will cover in next slide. When medication isn't enough or isn't an option, surgical and interventional therapies come into play. There are three main options to know. First one, pulmonary embolectomy. Pulmonary embolectomy is the surgical or catheter-based removal of the embolus itself. This is reserved for hemodynamically unstable patients with massive PE where thromboembolic therapy is contraindicated. It can be done via vascular catheter, a less invasive approach, or through open surgery. The goal is to decrease the right ventricular afterload, which is dangerously elevated when there is a massive obstruction. Surgical outcomes have improved significantly in recent years due to faster diagnosis and better surgical techniques. Next, IVC filter. An IVC filter, that is inferior vena cava filter, is a small cage-like device inserted through the femoral vein and placed at the level of the renal veins in the inferior vena cava. Once it's deployed, it expands and acts as a trap, catching large clots before they can travel up to pulmonary circulation. This is used specially when anticoagulation is contraindicated, not as a first choice. Complications are rare but include misplacement, migration, and perforation. And some other newer interventional techniques. There are also newer moderately invasive procedures including percutaneous interventional techniques, aspiration thrombolectomy where a catheter literally sucks out the clot, and ultrasound guided catheter thrombolysis which delivers clot dissolving medication directly at the site of blockage, and these are increasingly available as options at larger medical centers. This is the slide that's most directly going to serve you as a bedside nurse and as an NCLEX test taker. Let's go through nursing management systematically. Prevention first. Here's a key principle: the best treatment for PE is prevention. PE begins with DVT prevention, so your nursing priorities for at-risk patients post-op immobilized obese include applying intermittent pneumatic compression devices, getting patients up and moving as soon as safely possible, administering prophylactic anticoagulants as ordered, and identifying at-risk patients early in their hospital stay. Positioning and oxygenation. For the patient who has had a PE, position them in the semi-flawless position. You can see the semi-flawless position here. Head of bed is elevated around 15 to 45 degrees to facilitate breathing and reduce the work of ventilation. Administer oxygen as directed to keep SpO2 above 90%. This might mean nasal cannula, a face mask, BiPAP, or in severe cases, mechanical ventilation. Encourage incentive spirometry, deep breathing, and coughing to help prevent atelectasis and keep those alveoli open. Next, monitoring. Your monitoring priorities include continuous vital signs, cardiac rhythm monitoring, pulse oximetry, ABGs, and lung sounds. Monitor laboratory values to ensure the patient is in a therapeutic anticoagulant range. That's the INR for warfarin patients and APTT for patients on IV unfractionated heparin. Watch platelet counts for thrombocytopenia and the development of HIT, that is heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, and monitor hemoglobin assessing continuously for signs of bleeding. Safety and education. Closely observe for signs of bleeding and bruising because your patient is on anticoagulants, maybe fibrinolytics, and bleeding is a serious complication. Once the patient can be out of bed, implement 4 precautions. Maintain a patent IV line for medications and fluid therapy and keep monitoring for complications. Patient treating is essential before discharge. Your patient needs to understand anticoagulation continues for a minimum of 3 months, possibly indefinitely. They need regular INR monitoring. They must know the signs of bleeding and when to seek emergency care. Teach them about drug and food interactions with warfarin and reinforce the importance of follow-up with their healthcare provider. Also address the psychological dimension. These patients have often just experienced a frightening event. They may have felt like they were going to die. Provide emotional support and reassurance throughout your care. So in summary, the nursing priorities are semi-flawless position, oxygen to SpO2 more than 90%, monitor INR and APTT, watch for bleeding, fall precautions, and discharge education on anticoagulation. Let's look at the complications of pulmonary embolism. The complication 1, pulmonary infarction. Pulmonary infarction is the death of lung tissue. It occurs when a large or medium-sized pulmonary vessel greater than 2 millimeters in diameter is occluded and when there is insufficient collateral blood flow from the bronchial circulation or when the patient already has a pre-existing lung disease. The result is alveolar necrosis and hemorrhage. If the necrotic tissue becomes infected, it can form an abscess. Pleural effusions are common as complications. Complication 2, pulmonary hypertension. Pulmonary hypertension develops when PE causes hypoxemia or involves a large surface area of pulmonary bed. Once PE rarely causes pulmonary hypertension on its own, but recurrent PEs or PEs that never fully resolve gradually reduce the capillary bed over time. Eventually, this leads to chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension, a serious long-term condition. The right ventricle has to pump harder and harder against the elevated pressure, leading to right ventricular dilatation and hypertrophy. Outcomes are highly variable. Some patients decline rapidly, others live for decades with management. Alright, this is your NCLEX cheat sheet. If you are short on time before your exam, this slide is what you drill. Let me walk through each point. Number 1, the number 1 symptom of pulmonary embolism is dyspnea. Always, every time, that's your first answer. Number 2, the gold standard test for diagnosing PE is spiral CT scan, also called CT angiography or CTA. Number 3, the first line drug for acute pulmonary embolism is low molecular weight heparin, such as enoxaparin, safer and more effective than unfractionated heparin. Number 4, you do not monitor APTT with LMWH. That's a common wrong answer on the NCLEX. APTT monitoring is for unfractionated IV heparin only. Number 5, your positioning priority is semi-foulers. Elevate the head of the bed to improve breathing. And number 6, minimum warfarin duration is 3 to 6 months, and for large or recurrent PE, it may be indefinite. Now for the 5 distinctions that get students every time. 1, D-dimer is not specific. It can be elevated in many conditions. A positive D-dimer does not confirm PE, and up to half of small PEs have normal result. 2, chest X-ray and ECG are not diagnostic for PE. They show supportive findings only. Number 3, VQ scan is the imaging choice when IV contrast is contraindicated, that is contrast allergy or renal failure. Number 4, an IVC filter, that is inferior vena cava filter, is only used when anticoagulation is contraindicated. It is not a first line treatment. And number 5, and this one you cannot miss, massive PE presents as sudden mental status change, hypotension, and the feeling of impending doom. That tired is a medical emergency. Call for help, get the crash cart ready, and act immediately. And that's the full wrap on pulmonary embolism for NCLEX-RN. If you have any queries or any issues, please leave in the comment section. So if you have any issues, you can contact me using my WhatsApp and email provided in the description. Please subscribe my channel and stay with me. Thank you.